The vision would be to lean ever more into, what we describe as our whole person, whole organization approach, and really invite and make a compelling argument for organizations to, move away from the mechanistic understanding and model of what a workplace is to a more human-centric one where they really recognize human needs and recognize that creating workplaces where things like dignity and mattering and respect and connection and all the rest are not just good for people, that they're good for business. And so I'm hoping that we can play a role in really I guess evolving the way that workplaces think about work and approach work. We've got something called the Unmind Blueprint, which speaks to the different layers that one needs to consider when you think of employee well-being. There's obviously the individual, then there's the relational, there's the organizational, but then there's also like the legislative and standards, and then there's like the wider macro socio-political economic factors, right? Obviously, we are focused on those first three: individual, relational, organizational, and so we want to really lean into that. But I would love us one day to be able to have an impact on those outer layers as well. For me, and I'm bringing more my own personal thing here, which is related to what we're doing at Unmind, obviously, but I really believe in the relationship between, workplace culture and the ripple effect outwards to families and to communities and to society and to the planet at large. Like, we spend most of our time at work, and I think our state of being within the workplace, but also like just the values that we take on board and inhabit, I think that affects and ripples outwards. And so I think what we do in the workplace is it's a real opportunity for what we are then able to do beyond that.
All right, welcome to Researching Happy with Dr. Matthew Iasiello. This is the weekly podcast sharing the stories behind the studies of the wellbeing research world. I've got some little kids running around in the background, so I've got no camera on right now. It's been a really busy few weeks, like crazy busy. It's been Mental Health Month, so we get lots of speaking engagements. Of note was an invitation by Business SA to speak to about 400 people at the Adelaide Oval in what was described, I guess, as a live podcast with my colleague Callum McPherson, who has his own really interesting mental health podcast, which is called Young Blood. So I'd recommend checking that out. And we really spent about, 25, 30 minutes talking about lots of our work that we do at SAMRI and its relevance for workplaces. I was also really fortunate to be speaking at an event to a bunch of CEOs from biomed companies across South Australia, and was really interested to see they had a lot of interest in mental health, both for themselves and their own challenges, but also, and mostly, I guess, for their staff as well. So welcome to episode 26. All of this focus on workplace wellbeing is a very fitting topic for this week's guests. If I'd planned it, it would have been an absolute masterstroke, but sometimes you get lucky. And this week we host Steve Peralta, who is the co-founder and chief wellbeing officer at a company called Unmind, which is a really impressive workplace wellbeing company with offices in London, New York, and Sydney. This was a really great conversation. We talked about how the workplace wellbeing scene has really shifted over the years. We sort of talk about the idea of the pendulum swinging. Sometimes it swings too far and sometimes it swings back. We spoke about how Unmind's got this approach, I guess, to empowering employees and organizations to shift culture towards mental health and well-being with their whole person, whole organization approach, and something that was really interesting called the performance paradox. So Steve has been a really great person to meet and know over the last few years, and I've really enjoyed catching up once again. So I hope you'll enjoy the episode. Stay in touch with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, all the usual places. And if you don't mind, it would be great for you to like and subscribe the show wherever you can. It makes a big difference and helps other people know about the show. And I guess just on that, like I basically end every intro, send this with one other person that you think will enjoy the episode, and that's how I'll be really pleased for this show to grow, basically. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the episode. All right, we are here with Steve Peralta. We are in for a serious treat, I think, on Researching Happy. So welcome, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's really good to be here with you.
So kick us off. You've got, we're just talking a little bit offline there. You have an amazing, from the outside looking in, I don't know how you describe it, but it seems to me like a really amazing story. Maybe just, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about what you're sort of currently up to, the organization that you're a part of or a co-founder of, and maybe we can get into sort of the origin story.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm co-founder of a company called Unmind. So we're a workplace mental health and wellbeing startup. I'm also its chief wellbeing officer. I can tell you more about that as we talk as well. But I've been in the workplace wellbeing space for about 15 years now. Before Unmind, I initially started out as a personal trainer, but I've worked as a coach and a consultant and a facilitator. Unmind's been around for about 7 years now. Yeah. Prior to my career in well-being, I had a very different career. I was in the entertainment industry for 10 years as a singer and a songwriter and a musician and an actor. And so I've had quite a curvy career progression, as it were, but it's one that's been interesting for me. I've learned a lot, I've grown a lot. Happy to talk about it more, but yeah, that's sort of what I'm up to now.
Yeah, great. And so you're in London at the moment, right? Are you from South Africa?
Yeah, so I'm actually not in London. We are an hour and a half outside of London. Okay. Now, we used to live in London, but during the pandemic and lockdown, we moved, took our opportunity, and now we've got space, and we're right next door to a woods, a forest, and it was a good move. I live here with my wife Laura, and my dog Lola. She's beautiful, a double doodle. So no human children yet, but it's something Laura and I are talking about now. And I guess, to be honest, at the age of 45, I sort of feel ready for it, maybe for the first time. We each have our own life trajectories, and mine is such. But yeah, I'm South African. I've lived in the UK about 3 different times. So once for about 4 years when I was 19 to 23. That's when I was a very lost young man. Again, I'm happy to tell you more about that. And then I lived for about 2 years between the age of 32 and 34. I was going through a pretty big transition in my life. That's actually when I started to transition my career into well-being. And then for the past 7 years, we've lived here. It's when I co-founded Unmind. So our head office is in London. We also have, as you know, an office in Sydney and an office in New York. But I spend most of my time here in the UK.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's just such impressive growth, I think, even just to hear from sort of just the face value. You've been around for 7 years and you have an office in those 3 major cities. Sure. What exactly does Unmind do?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's the proposition has evolved over the years. But what we do is effectively help employees, and we help organizations to elevate their mental health and well-being. The way we've done that has evolved over the years. It was initially a solution that organizations would take on for their employees. So we provided support and empowerment for employees to understand and nurture their own mental health and well-being. That's involved into, we do that, and also it's more of an organizational offering, helping organizations understand the degree to which they, as an organization, are either supporting or not supporting the mental health and well-being of their people. And I can detail that as well. And then we help them, do that better, take a data-informed approach to creating a workplace culture that better elevates the mental health and well-being of their people. And so we work with large organizations. We've got clients, Uber and British Airways and John Lewis and Samsung and a whole bunch. We also have a few interesting clients like Orlando Magic basketball team and Major League Baseball and the Wolves Premiership football team. So it's quite interesting. It's like really, it's stuff I probably couldn't have imagined 7 years ago. But it's been a wonderful journey for myself. I've learned a lot. Once things started to take off, as it were, I certainly had a healthy dose of imposter syndrome. I'm not an expert. I've been in the space for a while, but I'm not a clinician. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. Thankfully, my co-founder is a clinical psychologist, and we have a team of brilliant clinical psychologists and positive psychologists and organizational psychologists and the like. So we have sufficient expertise, but I certainly had like my period of like wondering, shit, how am I supposed to really go about this, But then things evolved over time. I just started leaning into, my own strengths that I had to bring to it all. And it's just been great to watch it grow over the 7 years.
It's amazing. Yeah. I wonder, we've talked a lot about on this show. This is, I lose track of numbers by the time I get to publishing, but this must be episode 26 or something like that. And I think we haven't spoken since I started the podcast, basically. So it's one of the things that we've been really talking about. I've heard from a few people when I've invited them, they say, I'm not actually a researcher. Are you sure you want to talk to me? Basically, is what a few people have said. And the point is, I think on the show, we've really valued the ecosystem around this stuff because yes, there's the researchers, but there's the people that need to turn this into real world solutions, and they're completely different skill sets and maybe even personality types. So I wonder, I wonder what it is you think. You sort of talked about the imposter syndrome, but then relying on your strengths. Like, what were the type of strengths? Did you have a business background at all, or?
No.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had many reasons for my imposter syndrome. Valid reasons, let's say, and I think it was as part of my journey to experience the anxiety and the self-doubt that came with that. And if we had just stayed the small team that we were trying to do what we were doing, then I think it would have been warranted. However, we brought on a team of the expertise that we needed. And so over time, I could start to play to my strengths, which are far more, I guess, humanistic strengths. I guess strengths like enthusiasm and empathy, and I love to connect with people and inspire people, and so those are the things I started playing to. I also have a very strong curiosity, and so I guess in a way, because I'm not an expert, I'm not hyper focused on one specific domain or area. I read, I've probably got a book problem, so I read a lot, and I'm always doing my own research and reading, and I love integrating different things into new sort of ways of thinking about the world and thinking about well-being. And so I guess I brought that kind of lens to Unmind, which sometimes might be limited in someone who's more of an expert, right? So that perhaps was a strength of sorts. I'm really passionate about this, and so I've always brought that passion to both internally and externally with all things Unmind. I've been developing a curiosity and passion for this idea of human flourishing, again, which has influenced in different ways Unmind. So it's really just been playing into all of that, and the more I stopped worrying about whether I fitted the mold of what an exec should be or what this should be, the more I started to flourish in my role and so on, and just started to just be my weird self and, play to my strengths. And I think, that's what's helped me for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think, it's probably a theme of where we'll go into, but the standard mold kind of sucks. Like, that's kind of part of the problem. That's why there are these workplace well-being consultancies, basically, because the standard mold is a bit maybe outdated. I wonder whether you would resonate with this. I was listening to an interview with Tom Brady, the NFL player, and I think he mentioned almost very similar strengths in the sense of just like enthusiasm. I think he probably brought up like consistency as a strength, but one which really connected with me was almost like naivety. And what he meant by that was almost saying, I'll just I'll just go into something. If I knew how hard it was, I would never have done it. But I kind of was happy to go in naive. I mean, you could maybe call that courageous. I think he was obviously being sort of self-depreciating.
Yeah.
But do you have a sense of that yourself?
Definitely. I like that connection between naivety and courage. I think it's perhaps a bit of both, but I was certainly naive when it came to what I was getting myself into by being a co-founder of a startup, right? To be honest, I hadn't really been interested in that kind of thing in the past. I've always just, it sounds cheesy, but I've always just, followed my passions and had a sort of a fuzzy vision of what I've been moving towards. That's all I've ever been doing, really. Thankfully, we had some co-founders in the beginning who actually did know what to expect, what to do. But I think not knowing it in itself, again, is potentially a positive in some ways. It doesn't limit you, and it allows you to almost take more of an emergent approach rather than I've been there, done that, this is how you meant to do it. Because I think that is actually limiting. So I think the naivety that I had, maybe still have in some respects, is sometimes a strength, yes.
Yeah, probably, yeah, exactly. Naivety probably has a negative connotation, like almost like a, what would you call it? Like an ignorance almost. And obviously that's not how I mean it. That's cool. And so, I mean, obviously I'm glad, because what a growth story. It's just quite incredible. There couldn't be too many other, you don't have to sort of name competitors or anything like that, but there couldn't be too many competitive organizations who have had such rapid growth as your organization. Or are there? I'm not sure.
I mean, we did experience a lot of growth, like particularly during the pandemic.
Okay.
One of the fastest growing ones in the UK, and companies in the UK. So we experienced a lot of growth. I think there's various reasons for that. There's right place, right time. We had a good foundation when the pandemic hit. People really needed this. But it's been I'm told it is a good growth that we've had over the years. Like I said, for me, I had nothing to compare it against really, but it's been a great journey.
Great. Maybe optimistic naivety or something is what we should call that. Really cool. And so what are the I'm just interested in the differences between the offices, because they're obviously three pretty different cultures in a way. I mean, obviously they're all Western, all English speaking, that sort of thing. Maybe you might think the people in Sydney don't speak the same language as you. I'm not sure. But what are the, because you're obviously working in workplaces across those three countries and I assume even more than that. How did like cultural differences come in? I know I'm throwing that one on the spot. It just popped in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, there are cultural differences, right? And which I think that's why it's good that we have offices in these different regions. For example, those regions make up the majority of our clientele. And so I guess we can understand some of those cultural nuances better. If I just think off the top of my head, I mean, I think the UK has been quite progressive in terms of its approach to mental health in the workplace. I think more progressive than the US, for example. I think the US is catching up. Australia has a progressive approach to mental health as well. I mean, I think just the spirit of well-being is so pervasive across Australia, it seems, and so it's something that everyone's very aware of. At the end of the day, though, like I think I was asked this yesterday, like there are these cultural nuances, but I sometimes think about, we're human beings with likely a few intrinsic universal human needs, and I think that sort of is what connects all of these cultures, right? Yeah. And that's what I'm really thinking about workplace in terms of what we should invite workplaces to recognize is the role of human needs and how we can honor and meet those. Sure. But there are differences, but there's certain unique similarities.
Common. Yeah, that's right. Cool. Common. And so, because you touched on something which I'd like to go into a little bit, which was that idea of the sort of shift you said as you've developed over time. I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the start it was very sort of individual focused, giving people the skills, to manage their own well-being. And now you've sort of, I assume, sort of complemented that with more sort of organizational culture, maybe structure, recommendations as well. I'm almost thinking like, say America is a very like, bootstrap, pull yourself up, individualistic. I'm putting too many things onto this, but I'm thinking in Australia, people have started to reject this kind of finger pointing, well-being message of like, it's up to you, to improve your well-being, which doesn't take into, account the context around you. Like, is that message consistent now across those three countries, or are there differences?
I feel like that message is, or that way of seeing things is touching most countries that we certainly work with, right? There's been a shift from seeing employee well-being as the domain of the individual, right? Like you say, just put itself together and we give you the support and that's it. And recognizing the essential role that the environment and the culture that those individuals are in plays. I think that is maybe to varying degrees, but that's becoming a common shift that we've seen for sure.
Okay. It's funny because I guess we obviously in the work that I do, it is very much focused on the individual. It's about taking, providing those psychological skills, which are never the golden bullet, obviously, and they are impacted, obviously, by your environment around. But I do get the sense very recently that the pendulum has swung, but it's almost the overreaction is there, where it's almost like there is no individual agency, almost is the message, and it's purely a result of the workplace. So do you get that sense at all? Or maybe I'm just overly...
And I think that's so common, right? This pendulum swinging between polarities and almost becomes like a wrecking ball, and then you focus too much on the one side that leads to its like downside shadow, then you like overcorrect, and so I definitely see that, and I disagree with it. It has to be a both and thing, right? This is about the culture and it's about personal agency, and it's about being able to facilitate both of those things, right? I mean, we've seen there's been shifts that we've been a part of and we've seen over the years, and I guess the first shift was this shift, I'm talking about the workplace here, organizational culture, maybe to put this all into a bit more context, was the shift from, just reactive focus to more of a preventative focus, right? But then more recently, the shift is, like I've said, recognizing that employee well-being can't just be by giving your employees tools and support, because you're missing out on that integral part of the picture, the culture and the environment. And so I think the more progressive companies are realizing that their well-being strategy can't just be an add-on or a benefit, but it has to be how the actual business operates. It's all about their culture, their ways of working, how they lead, how they manage. That's the shift that I'm now seeing, but that certainly can't exclude the agency of everyone within that organization, which means all employees as well. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny how, I don't know, I think I've seen it in a few different sort of domains where that both and message is just so easily lost. Because I think particularly when you're someone that's advocating for a certain position, and you're probably correct, you start to lose that nuance because you're so focused on your advocacy, whichever side of the sort of the pendulum swing you stand.
Exactly.
But I think the thing I always kind of, my comment on this one is like, if you're in the world where you say actually it's entirely the environment around you, then you've almost rejected all of psychotherapy. Because, because otherwise, it's completely useless. All you could ever do to improve someone's mental health is to change the environment. But okay, that's cool. So I'm glad it's not the cowboys in the US just pointing the focus on the individual. That's good. That's nice to hear.
But this is why a more holistic, integrated take is so important, right? And I think it also comes back to sometimes the limitations of specialization and the like, right? Expertise. That becomes your thing.
Right.
We have to take a far more expansive perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe you could just sort of walk us through the Unmind. Like you offer a range of services, right? Like maybe that would be really interesting, I think, for people to hear. Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of what we offer, maybe I can speak then to maybe what underpins all of that. But, we have something called Unmind Elevate, which is, I guess, what we started with, which is proactive, preventative, psychoeducational content for employees, help them understand and nurture their mental health and well-being. And that's like over 700 hours of really beautiful content. It's designed by clinical psychologists, positive psychologists, organizational psychologists, other experts. We cover the whole spectrum of life, let's say. So there's that. We cover the obvious categories that you would expect: stress, anxiety, depression, but also fulfillment, meaning, and purpose, and sleep, and exercise, and menopause, and intersectionality, and so it's really the full spectrum, as it were. So we have that for the employee. We have Unmind Talk, which we've recently added on, which is online therapy and coaching, effectively. We recognize we couldn't exclude the human-to-human interaction, and that felt like an important thing to bring on. We have Unmind Exec, which is where we go and speak with executive teams, typically informed by data, and the data that we get is through our Unmind Insights. So we do have the individual side of that, which helps individuals measure and understand their mental health and well-being. We measure stress, anxiety, depression, but also fulfillment and sleep and health and so on. But what we also measure, and this is the workplace insights bit, is the organizational factors. We have to measure both, right? The organizational factors that support employee well-being in the workplace, and that is, organizational support, senior leadership support, manager support, organizational mental health maturity, psychological safety, fulfillment, stress. So, we take a really comprehensive approach. We then can use that data to have conversations with the executive team. And what we're able to do is, and you can probably understand why this would land, is we can show the financial impact that this data has on their business and what making improvements would have on, I guess, the bottom line as such. So Unmind Exec, really important part. And then we also have Unmind Manager, which is, I don't know if you came across that piece of research recently, which showed that for up to 70% of people, their manager has more of an influence on their mental health than their therapist.
Oh, yeah. Really?
There's a really important role, right? And so we offer manager training, effectively empowering managers to better understand and know how to support the mental health of their team and their people, and also create cultures of well-being in their teams. So it's a very comprehensive sort of whole person, whole organization approach.
Wow.
And what I wanted to say was the dual continuum model did play a part in the development of the thinking around this, right? We always started Unmind wanting to change the narrative around mental health. We wanted it to be seen as something more than just a set of problems, which speaks to what we offer in our platform now, right? And we've always spoken about our vision as being a world where mental health is universally understood and nurtured and celebrated. And so we wanted people to understand that mental health was something we had all of the time. It's something we can proactively nurture and develop. It's not just this set of problems.
Yeah.
And we used to speak about the mental health spectrum, and it was common language, not just with us, but it's something we can all move up and down on, with problems on the one end, thriving on the other end. And it sounded good, but from my own personal perspective, and not being an expert, I must admit there was something about it that didn't work for me. I don't know, I'll try and explain this from my perspective. It felt that if mental health was something that we moved up and down on all the time, I couldn't see how sometimes that means one day we have a diagnosed mental health condition on one day and then be free of it and thriving on the next. So that didn't really make sense to me. It felt like quite a binary thing. And then I also thought if you were experiencing, let's say, depression or another mental health condition, you could be, does that mean you can't be experiencing those things that make up thriving, like meaning and fulfillment, connection and purpose? And so in a way it felt to me like didn't quite seem right, and it actually felt like maybe it was dishonoring people experiencing mental illness by almost making it synonymous with just having a bad day, for example. And so it was part of the narrative in the space at the time, but it personally didn't sit well with me. And like I said, I have a reading problem. Well, not a problem with reading, I read loads of books.
The opposite of a problem by the sounds of it.
And I'm always trying to evolve and update my beliefs and ways of thinking. And so I was like looking into this. And during my reading and research, I came across a paper by Corey Keyes. No, actually, it wasn't Corey Keyes initially. It was actually one of your papers. That's what I came across.
Yeah, how cool
I
is
think
that?
you did a meta-analysis of all.
Yeah, the scoping review. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
Yes, exactly.
just to pause. Yeah, that's exactly how we met.
Yeah.
I think you contacted
Oh,
me,
yes.
and from my perspective, I mean, I don't know what other researchers' experiences are, but it is an absolute thrill to have someone say, "Hey, I read your work, and I've got all these questions." Like, it's such a anticlimax. I have found publishing a paper, because you think, all right, it's out there now. I'm going to get all these. People are going to read it and they're going to have opinions and they're going to hit me up. And then actually it's kind of mostly just silence. So yeah, fully have appreciated that. It's been really good to connect with you on that, but please continue.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's you just reminded me. I remember I reached out to you, and then I had a whole bunch of questions which you were gracious in answering. So it really landed with me, the dual continuum model, just intuitively. For me, the implications were like both respectful of people experiencing mental health problems, but they were also, it almost felt more empowering from my perspective. It didn't minimize experiences of mental illness by suggesting that you can just overcome your condition by meditating or getting good sleep or spending time with people or uncovering and aligning with your values and the like. Those things that are so important. But it did suggest that while not being able to remove mental illness, things like that can elevate your mental well-being. And this like made sense to me, right? And it felt more resonant with my personal intuition. And so anyways, I brought this to some colleagues at Unmind. I started talking about it more at Unmind. I started talking with my science team, made up of mostly clinicians, who rightfully had questions, but they did their own research into it. And I think I even set up a call with some of them with you.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah. We looked into it thoroughly and we started to integrate it into our philosophy, and it informed how we developed our approach. And so I guess I said all of that because that, in a way, has led to us ensuring that we almost cover the most / all of that dual continuum model.
Yeah,
right?
and look, full disclosure, I guess, from my end, I'm currently in a bit of a rap battle, basically, on the dual continuum model because there was an article that came out. I think we might have spoken about this. That kind of said, not to overly simplify it, but it was kind of saying the relationship between well-being and mental illness is bipolar, and that doesn't actually sort of get in the way of any of the direction of positive psychology. We, myself and a few colleagues, published a commentary and basically saying we reject that idea, and it was from a theoretical perspective, very similarly along lots of the lines that you're going with. And I've just found out like a couple of days ago, a response to our response has just come out.
Wow. Okay.
So we can look out for that. But anyway, so that's cool. I just was having a conversation with someone this morning about this, and they're a clinician, and they hadn't heard of the dual continua, but it's the experience we always find, which is like, that's kind of how I operate. It's actually more. Sure. It's still a simplification, obviously, but it's more similar to how I operate day to day in my clinical practice than actually the assumptions of the single continuum.
For sure. And I can imagine, especially doing the work you do, I mean, I guess what's important to recognize is, the map is not the territory, right? But is that map useful, helpful, or not as well? And to me, like, the implications of that model are far more useful, far more compassionate, far more effective than the other one, right? I mean, I'm again talking from my layman perspective.
It's a nice, it's a cool case study in a way, because you're sort of saying, I kind of see where this is going. You've sort of brought it to an independent group in a way. Obviously, I guess technically they're your employees, but independent. I'm sure they'll tell you if they disagreed.
Definitely.
What were their reservations, and then kind of have they got on board, or how has it sort of ended up?
Yeah, they are on board for sure. I mean, their reservations are always: is this robust? Is this based on robust evidence and research and science? And so they just needed to look into it, right? I think they have said it's not. It's obviously, we don't want people to think that they fit squarely in each of those. And it needs
absolutely
to
not.
So like that was one of their reservations as well. But from my perspective, that they're certainly respectful of and on board with the science. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. And I think there's like even subtlety to it. I think some of my colleagues just published a paper. They were telling me about it with in the field of eating disorders, and I think they tried to sort of they did something called latent profile analysis, which is almost it's basically finding patterns of people, basically like patterns of people within a data set, and it's fully data driven. You don't sort of impose anything. And they sort of did find these 4 groups, these 4 quadrants, like what you would expect from the dual continuum model. And for people who aren't, I think we've spoken about the dual continuum model in every episode of this podcast, so you could just flick back to any, particularly the one with Corey Keyes. But I think in this group of people, they actually didn't find anyone with high well-being and high levels of distress. But what they did find was there was a difference between those with sort of like medium to high well-being and those with low well-being. And even that, you know, that's a big difference in terms of someone's sort of lived experience of that condition, which again, that is nuance that's not possible under that bipolar sort of understanding of a single continuum.
Sure.
So
even
if, yeah, so it's almost to say like, even if like it's very unlikely to have like the highest level of well-being with a mental health challenge, that doesn't actually sort of disprove the model, basically.
Sure. Okay, I understand.
But yeah, that's cool. And so as a result of the sort of dual continua conversation, I mean, I don't know if it was as causal as this, but is that you were already doing sort of well-being focused offerings at that time, or what was the shift there?
We were. It just helped us better understand, I guess, what we're doing. Like you're saying, like we're probably doing it intuitively, but this helped us to have a better model and philosophy of it. It is also what, I guess, informed bringing in therapy as well. We also have Unmind Help, which is some of your more reactive crisis support. So we just wanted to ensure that we were meeting the needs of the whole organization, which I would imagine would be mapped across all of those quadrants, right? So it helps us take a more complete and holistic approach.
All right, cool. And so I've seen you talk about the performance paradox, and I think that would be a really interesting thing for us to get into. It's like the snazziest name. I love the idea. I'm just like, I'm on board already, basically. But it would be really interesting to hear what you're seeing, what it is, and how that kind of drives any of your work.
Yeah, I think it's really relevant to what's going on today in workplaces around well-being. I mean, performance paradox is just, it's what I chose to call it for some talks I was doing, but it is a bit of a paradox. I think the paradox therein is that if you hyper-focus on performance, you will end up compromising it, right? You know, that's like the paradox. Yeah. But I think it comes back to the polarity thing that we were talking about earlier as well, the both and versus the either or approach. I think for many people and organizations, we see it as an either or thing, right? It's either we focus on results or we prioritize people's well-being. And, you know, we're an organization, so therefore we have to focus on results, and we end up sacrificing well-being. So that's what I see playing out. And having spoken about this a fair bit, it really lands with people. But, you know, we know that if we do that and people's well-being suffer, like, you know, they'll increase their risk of burnout. They'll be flooded with cortisol, which will hamper their capacity to be collaborative and to be creative and to think laterally and to be resilient and to be engaged. You know, all those ingredients of effectively high performance, right? So when you start to talk about that, the message starts to land. And so it's really important to recognize that well-being has to be seen as an essential ingredient of performance. And, you know, performance is becoming something that many organizations are talking about a lot these days. Doing more with less, you know, performance. I think it's like it might be a pendulum swing off the back of the hyper-focus on well-being during the pandemic, right? But it has to be a both-and thing. But if we compare being in a state of well-being to chronic stress, you know, we know that the body and the brain would be, as opposed to being flooded with cortisol, let's say, there'll be more oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and endorphins and DHEA, and I'm certainly no biochemical expert, but we know that this enhances our capacity for creativity and problem solving and collaboration, and that's almost like the cocktail for flow state. And so that makes you understand that we can't have performance without well-being. And so then it invites, and I think, for example, Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory is like a similar kind of territory. But what it invites is this both and approach. And it's something I came across which I've found useful, and when I share it with leaders and that, they've found useful as well. But it's Barry Johnson's polarity mapping framework. I don't know if you've come across that.
Polarity.
But it's
what was it? Sorry.
Polarity mapping.
Okay.
To me, it's a helpful tool to really make this both and approach practical, and it involves. So you come with a problem. Let's say the problem is performance. How do we perform well? You then identify the polarities. Let's say focus on results, focus on well-being. You can imagine a quadrant thing, results, well-being. You then identify the upsides of focusing on both. So the upsides of focusing on results, obviously there's a whole host. The upsides of focusing on well-being, the whole host. And then what you need to do is identify the downsides of hyper-focus on results. So burnout. A hyper-focus on well-being at the expense of results. It could be complacency, not focusing on results, etc. You list that all out. And then you need to recognize that what we typically do is that wrecking ball where we hyper-focus, it causes the downsides. We then overcorrect.
Right.
Hyper-focus causes the downsides. And so you sort of connect with that. You identify what the aspiration is, if you are able to really leverage the upsides. And then you identify what the opposite of that is, like what's at stake if you don't get this right. If performance is the goal, we know that burnout is going to compromise that. We also know that not focusing on results can compromise that. And so what it does is it invites you to see the whole map. And then the next steps, which I think are quite powerful, is that you identify actions and strategies across both polarities. And these can be ones to leverage either or, but also like integrated strategies that can leverage both.
Yeah.
And then you identify early warning signs on both sides of the polarity, which can help you identify when you're leaning too far so that you can course correct sooner, right? And so that's where, data and so on would come into play and measurement. But I think it's just a really useful tool to see the polarity, to understand that it needs to be a both and then to help you identify ways to leverage the upsides of both.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is that the sort of thing someone can just Google and they would find something?
Yeah, if you look it up, for sure. I guess the important thing to say is that you're not going to find some perfect balance. It's like there's this tension is inherent, right?
Yeah.
It's always going to be there, which is why identifying when you're moving a bit too far into the one and course correcting is good, right?
Yeah, and
so you minimize the wrecking ball nature,
Yeah, absolutely.
Smaller things.
And I just think it's I don't know. I'm not going to try and explain where this comes from, but I get the sense that people really want this kind of like set and forget thing when it comes to probably most aspects of their life, to be honest. But we're on the topic of workplace well-being. It's kind of like we put this thing in place, that's just going to work forever, and let's keep going. And I just see it more and more at the individual level, but then at the group level, this need for self-reflection, just building that in, basically. It's just so important to check in, right? Because, like you say, where that wrecking ball's kind of ended up, and day to day, maybe it shifts, or there'll be like sort of peaks and valleys and stuff. Yeah, is that something you sort of you agree with?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it can't be a set and forget, and that's at the individual and the organizational level, right? Which is why reflection, assessment, measurement is so important. So you understand where you're at, and then you need to have the strategies in place to be able to either course correct or to move towards the aspiration, the goal. But it's so important, which is why, and I think maybe for too long it was just seen as a set and forget, like just a tick box exercise, which is why it hasn't worked. This has to be an ongoing commitment that involves the whole organization, leadership, management,
Yeah,
etc.
and you put a couple of surveys on LinkedIn, and I thought that they were really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
They were really, I think it was not too long ago, but you were sort of saying, if I was a skilled podcaster, I would have had these written down. But it was something like, what's like almost like the purpose of a workplace or something like that. And it was sort of like to make money, to look after their employees, so a couple of other options. And to be honest, I was actually surprised that no one ticked to make money. You know, there's this idea. I don't know. I mean, I kind of found that in my mind that's again representing the pendulum swing a little bit, because it's like, yeah, businesses need to be profitable to be actually to exist and to employ people.
Yeah, of course.
What were your thoughts on those results?
Yeah, they were interesting, and perhaps they are a reflection of maybe like an echo chamber, maybe my LinkedIn contacts. Who knows? But I do think it does reflect a shift in how we are thinking about work, for sure. I think it might have been a shift that would have happened anyway, but it's certainly been accelerated by the pandemic, I think. However, we can't just swing to the other direction as well again, right? Like, I mean, like you say, a business needs to make money, be profitable, etc., to have the impact it wants to have. You know, and we experience this very much so in Unmind, right? We are a very vision-driven, purpose-driven organization, and we are a venture capital-backed business as well. So you can imagine there's a tension there as well, and so it has to be a both-and thing. And not just a both-and thing, you need to recognize the real relationship between those two things. By being successful as a business, we are able to achieve our mission and our purpose. If we were unsuccessful as a business, we wouldn't be able to, right? And so you can't take a one-sided view of that. But you can't just be sort of Taylorism, profit above all else either, right? So it has to be, perfect purpose, profit, people. Like, it needs to be that integrated approach. But I do think there's a shift towards, which is a good shift, work being good for people, being good for society, being good for the planet. That's an important shift. So it can't just be profit at the expense of those things, right?
Yeah. Is that a hard tension? Like having venture capital, which obviously traditionally is very profit driven. Is that a hard tension that, or has even the VC kind of world shifted a little bit? Or am I being too naive again?
It is a difficult tension.
Yeah.
It certainly is a difficult tension. And I think there probably are some VCs who have shifted. I mean, the one very definite shift that has happened in the VC world has been the shift from growth at all costs to sustainable growth on the path to profitability. That's been a very definite shift.
Okay.
That's been forced, I guess, just by market conditions. But obviously, their overarching aim is to make a return on their investment. So that's still a priority.
Yeah. And look, I think some people can sort of cast that as evil or something like that. I'm not in that camp, to be honest with you, because like you say, these things, like an organization like yours, can't grow without that investment. It can't develop as rapidly and then achieve the purpose that you're looking for. So definitely don't want to go there. But in terms of, I'm just trying to think of an example of sort of the where you were going before with the polarity mapping. I'm kind of thinking about the call back to offices. I don't know if this has happened so much in the UK, but I mean, you hear stories all over. Even places like Zoom themselves have sort of mandated going back to the office. Like, do you think that's an example of that sort of productivity versus well-being pendulum swing? Like, it's kind of this idea of there are aspects of working from home that are there for well-being, but it comes potentially at the risk of productivity. Just by saying that's it, you're all forced back here now. That's that productivity swing maybe going too far. Is that an example, or is there something else you would say that's a nicer one?
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's an example of something for sure, like a swing back to the opposite, as it were. It could be a control, autonomy swing, potentially. I don't think it's the right thing to do to then swing back there, right? I have my own perspectives on it, but I guess I won't bring that into it right now. But but I think, and I hope I'm not incorrect here, but I think during the pandemic, productivity increased. Right, first of all, we were working a whole lot more. Being at home, the boundaries between work and life blurred. Productivity increased, but for the first time, and I think this is in Gallup data, engagement and well-being are normally like they go together, right? But for the first time, engagement and well-being went in like opposite directions.
Right.
And I think that's linked here to some degree as well. I think maybe human beings have recognized that and have started to want to create a bit more balance, a boundary between work and life. I'm not sure if that's being felt by leaders, and so they want to like reclaim control. I mean, I don't know is the answer, but it certainly does feel like a swing back to the old ways of thinking about things, right?
Yeah, interesting. And okay, cool. And so back to, I guess, the future of Unmind, sort of not back to now, but just going straight to the future of Unmind. One thing that I've noticed, again, from afar, has been research publications coming out of Unmind. I wonder whether, it would be cool to hear sort of some of the visions, if you can share anything about where you would imagine this type of work going, what the future looks like, and how much actually contributing to the research literature plays in that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, science does sit at the heart of what we do, as does research. Our science team would be able to probably answer your question with a lot more clarity and give you a lot more information. But we certainly want to continue to contribute to the literature, especially around workplace culture, organizational culture, and how that influences mental health and well-being. So that's something we're obviously really interested in, and hopefully our workplace insights can play a role in that. We're actually about to publish a case study on how we use our own Unmind approach internally and the impact that's had on employee well-being, but also on presenteeism and the like. So that's interesting. I'd love us to develop that as we move forward. But from my perspective, like the vision would be to lean ever more into what we describe as our whole person, whole organization approach, and really invite and make a compelling argument for organizations to move away from the mechanistic understanding and model of what a workplace is to a more human-centric one, where they really recognize human needs and recognize that creating more workplaces where things like dignity and mattering and respect and connection and all the rest are not just good for people, that they're good for business. And so I'm hoping that we can play a role in really evolving the way that workplaces think about work and approach work. We've got something called the Unmind Blueprint, which speaks to the different layers that one needs to consider when you think of employee well-being. There's obviously the individual, then there's the relational, there's the organizational, but then there's also like the legislative and standards, and then there's like the wider macro socio-political economic factors, right? Obviously, we are focused on those first three: individual, relational, organizational, and so we want to really lean into that. But I would love us one day to be able to have an impact on those outer layers as well. For me, and I'm bringing more my own personal thing here, which is related to what we're doing at Unmind, obviously, but I really believe in the relationship between workplace culture and the ripple effect outwards to families and to communities and to society and to the planet at large. Like, we spend most of our time at work, and I think our state of being within the workplace, but also like just the values that we take on board and inhabit, I think that affects and ripples outwards. And so I think what we do in the workplace is it's a real opportunity for what we are then able to do beyond that.
Yeah.
So I would love to, this starts to speak about, ecology and the climate and social impact and all the rest. But for me, I would love to be able to impact outwards in that way.
Yeah, nice. I went to a lecture. There was a professor, I think from Scotland. I think she's Australian, but she works in Scotland. Or I kind of missed the first couple of minutes, to be honest with you. But she was really speaking about the economics of well-being, basically, and health policy, basically. But she was really coming from this interesting perspective of how can we design economic systems and business structures that are basically more conducive to well-being. And she had all these really interesting examples from even things like co-ops through to all sorts of ideas, even things that community councils had been doing, a lot from the UK. And it just opens your eyes. I think there's a part of this message is just like seeing what's actually possible and seeing that there are all these at the moment, I think they're all small projects, to be honest, but seeing how these small projects are sustainable, that probably most people don't even think, it didn't even enter their mind that's a possibility to begin with.
Of course, and that's really interesting. I think the reason why it doesn't enter our minds is because, we have this dominant Western-centric way of knowing and being in the world, and so we sort of stay stuck in that paradigm, even when it comes to the solutions that we think of, right? So the people that I'm interested in when it comes into this space, I don't know if you know, like Otto Scharmer's work.
No, I don't know much about. I don't know. I think basically anything about this topic, to be honest with you.
Sure.
So it's name some names.
There's another guy he's a bit of a maverick, and I find him really interesting. I've started reading him recently, but he's got me thinking about how his name's. I hope I don't pronounce this incorrectly, but it's Bayo Akamolafe. It's probably the best way to pronounce it. But he got me thinking of how almost colonized our minds are in the Western world. And so he talks about like moving beyond or breaking free from these dominant Western-centric ways of how we show up in the world, how we think in the world. And he speaks to like the wisdom that lies in indigenous practices and ways of being and knowing in the world. You're probably aware of this far more than I am, but like it got me thinking about the lack of diversity in well-being research, for example. Like,
for sure.
Is it called WEIRD?
Yeah.
Western, educated, industrial, etc., etc. But I think that also infiltrates how we think about the workplace and how we can improve and culture and society. And there's some really interesting territory there, which I'm just exploring, reading more about, becoming interested in and curious. But I definitely think that the old way of doing things is our old way of doing things, our sort of Western productivity centric, GDP centric, all that kind of stuff is limiting and needs to be transcended. There's a book I bought recently called the Regenerative Enterprise, which looks really, really interesting. I think that's an interesting concept, the idea of regeneration versus sustainability. I think that can be applied to workplaces. There's lots of great stuff. Luckily, I'm not bound by a specific domain, so I'm always just reading and getting curious and finding out more. There's one thing I'll just say which might have relevance to what we're saying. It's more just as a thing to ponder on.
Yeah,
but
please.
Bio said, which I thought was really interesting, he said, "The times are urgent, let's slow down."
Yeah.
Which I thought was such a lovely paradox there. But there's something in that, right?
Absolutely. I just think our attention, like we talked about the importance of self-reflection, of sort of checking in, both as individuals and as organizations, whatever communities, our attentions are just dominated, completely dominated. Sometimes by arbitrary business, sometimes by technology. Like there's lots of reasons why. So that's really nice. Catherine Trebeck was the person who I went to see. Sorry, Catherine, I forgot your name. But yeah, so she's based in Scotland, but I believe she's Australian. That's awesome. Sorry.
Just one thing. Sorry, you said attention there. Like I think that's a critical piece here is attention. Like we become disconnected from ourselves, each other, the planet, because our attention is so distracted and diffuse and monopolized by well, we know what it's monopolized. It's social media. It's short-term, in the moment, like demands and urgent things, and it means that we miss the bigger picture, right? And we become really myopic and short-term focused. And I'm sure that must play some role in us not recognizing the urgency that Bio mentions there. And maybe the slowing down bit is in reference to we need to step back, open up our awareness, pay attention, and then we'll actually know what the hell to do, rather than just being blinded to it all.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's easier just to jump in and kick young people down while they're, kick them while they're down sort of thing. But, man, they're glued to phones. Like I'm bad enough personally. I'll put my hand up and say terrible. I'm trying not to demonstrate that to my kids, but, talk about attention. Like, I don't know. It feels like it's just like it's a lost battle. I know that's not a really optimistic message.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah. No, I mean, it takes real. Wow. Well, you probably can't rely on willpower. Probably takes a way of designing your life and your day in a way that doesn't make you a slave to it, right?
Yeah.
But it's tough because it's, as we know, it's been designed in a way to really capture our attention.
Absolutely,
it's
for
young people.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, last question really is just, you kind of almost alluded to it just now in terms of what does your day look like? Because you seem to have, I'm sure you're super busy, but like a bit of flexibility to kind of just think big picture and look around at the world and kind of take lessons and bring it back to the business. Is that how it kind of looks like for you day to day, or are you sort of like glued to a laptop sort of thing? How does it look for you?
Yeah. So my role has evolved over the years, and I have more capacity for that these days. However, a lot of my work still does involve a laptop, right? But I try and be a bit more disciplined about, taking breaks. Luckily, I've got the woods here, so I'll take my dog for a walk in the woods. I've got a little room there that overlooks out into the fields, and so I try and get nature and space and so on into my day. But in terms of how my day looks like, I'll wake up, I'll meditate, I'll play some music, I'll maybe go for a walk. And so I try and start the day with spaciousness, away from screens. What I do is I block out the first 3 hours of the day for, I call it monk mode, which is it will involve a laptop primarily, but it's time to focus or to think, etc. So that's sort of like sacred time. Then I'll have my break during the day of lunch and exercise. And then the rest of the day is either for, I guess, more urgent work or meetings and that kind of stuff. So I've tried to sort of set up the day so that I'm not totally stuck in that urgent, must happen now kind of frenetic mode.
Yeah, because I can imagine that's just a slippery slope, right? You just get pulled straight into that. I'm guessing you obviously have a lot of people that need your attention probably urgently, but I really respect that you're able to block out some time, and that must be very intentional, right?
Yeah, it's definitely intentional. And it's something that we're trying to invite the rest of the organization to do as well. We're doing an experiment now with our product development team where we're going to trial for about 90 days, like new ways of working where we embed these kinds of things and then just track the impact that has on well-being and performance and productivity and all the rest. So yeah, we're trying to embed that across Unmind as well.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. All right. Well, that's been awesome, Steve. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of, that we haven't covered off that you thought would be worth mentioning?
No, I mean, I've loved this conversation. So thanks for inviting me, first of all. It's been great to chat. There's probably lots of things I've left out that I might have wanted to speak about, but this feels good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problems. All right. Thank you very much.